Thank you. Jenny, can you hear me? Is
Yes.
everything okay?
Yes, very clear. Thank you.
Okay, good. First of all, let me say maayong hapon, good afternoon. And it really is a great opportunity for me here in the university to be able to share our own experience regarding our green campus. In the next slide, you will see that much has been said about Laudato Si, the care for our common home. And we do talk about the climate crisis being real and that it is not a hoax. And global warming is rapidly increasing. But I'd like to point out to a quote of Pope Francis: responding will require not only a personal change of heart among all of us, but the leadership of private institutions supporting not only education programs promoting environmental responsibility, but also transforming their own policies and practices consistent with them. There are three key ideas emerging from Silliman University's environmental efforts and has been presented this morning and elucidated in a number of other papers, the principle of subsidiarity. I'm a firm believer in the fact that things can be done where you are, and that if an action needs to be implemented, one can really take the initiative. So private institutions, business corporations, and non-government organizations, such as a university, can go ahead with their best practices in the hope that these will be replicated in public institutions and policies, thereby attaining a multiplier effect. Here at Silliman University, we have this implementation of a zero waste policy throughout our operations. And in 2018, when I assumed office, a few months after, I did manage to convince the Board of Trustees to implement, based on their adoption and approval of the environmental policies, guidelines, and best practices. So to go right into the first idea, practice what you preach. Silliman University believes in the vision of a Christian quality education committed to total human development for the well-being of the society and the environment. And here in the country, Silliman is known for a number of environmental programs, but there is a need for all the sectors and for all the students to rally behind a particular program so that environmental concern becomes the center of a number of our activities. Within the university, a number of faculty members in all the disciplines, they are expected to preach or practice what they preach. Of course, sometimes they can be preachy when it comes to their own discipline, but in their own specific disciplines, like medical sciences, engineering, biology, political science, agriculture, music, and so many others, those can be linked to the area of economics. For example, a number of illustrations were made about engineering, for instance. Given the disaster that we always experience, how can we engage in construction activities that will make our own homes resilient to the effect of inclement weather? Or even in the medical sciences, to what extent can our medical practitioners be able to reach out to the lost and the least, so that we ourselves can ensure that majority of the people in the community, if not all, are able to receive medical services. Our biology program covers both terrestrial, upland, and even, of course, the marine biology program. And the Filipinos are known to have their source of protein from the sea or from marine life. So it's important that conservation measures out at sea need to be implemented. So we have artificial reefs, we have closed, season for certain months of the year, and also mobilizing fisher folk themselves in seeing to it that whatever resource is before them, they get only a portion of that place, so as for the fish to regenerate. And Dr. Alcala, a well-known marine biologist, former secretary of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, has actually come up with a plan. And he was a former president of Silliman University and now a professor visiting, or rather adjunct professor at Silliman. And so he talks about 25% solution, meaning just use 25%, have the 3/4 to allow our own fish to regenerate for sustainability of the environment. Also, discussions on how people themselves can deal with scarce and finite resources as they satisfy their needs and wants from a disciplinal perspective. We hear of sustainable development goals, or what Bayani has actually shared about disaster and finance, insurance, for example. And how can our own people be mobilized so that there is what has been mentioned in the past presentation, a culture of frugality, a shared culture of frugality instead of having extravagance in the way we use both natural and marine resources and material resources. Second idea is adopting zero waste policies actually makes good business sense. And here at Silliman, we are serious with our segregation of waste because we know that this makes for efficient operational processes and the creation of alternative income streams. Because we have the biodegradable separate from recyclables and also the residuals, then the labor hours spent by our maintenance and personnel are drastically reduced, and therefore allows us to save on the personnel cost. There's also the stream of biodegradable waste that goes into our College of Agriculture for its own organic fertilizer production. Our materials recovery facilities also stimulates local household economy, since there are accredited buyers of our items that are recycled, and that contributes to their household income, and in effect reduces destruction of primary sources of products like trees and mineral deposits because of the reuse, recycle principle. Here at Silliman, we have solar energy. We have solar panels that also allow us to generate power and save costs, and allowing us to use whatever savings we have for our core business, which is the teaching and learning. The third idea is transforming environmental practices, stimulate pedagogical innovation. We have our own Center for Service Learning and Community Engagement. And many of the students that we have who go to the community are able to test the theories and the principles that they read in the books by being close in touch with fisher folk, with upland farmers, or with those agricultural workers. And these students are able to see how economic equality or inequality really plays out there in the ground, and to what extent Filipinos have access to resources. And these students are able to come up with their own reflection, and their ways of thinking would influence their own ways of proposing what can be done by themselves, by their friends, by their families. So also giving more importance to specific households. Here, as in any other countries, we always say, what is the average basket of goods that can be given to a particular household? And yet, if we look at the diversity of households in the specific communities, those averages do not necessarily work for them. Thus, again, bringing our own students to the community will call attention to the need for looking at economics, not just in terms of pesos and cents, but also in terms of their being empowered to do things for themselves, or minimizing their sense of helplessness for not being able to do things on their own. As mentioned by our previous presenter, there is resiliency among Filipinos, and being a social psychologist, I know that that is always a quality that we talk about, but we also have to make sure that that Filipino value or Filipino quality can also be complemented with real economic assistance to the different households. While I talk about the Silliman experience, our zero waste policy, at this time of the pandemic, the environmental policy impact may not be fully clear, but we know that a number of our own, let's say, all the twigs, all the scraps, and even our trees are now more green because of the people not being around and not disturbing our own physical environment, and the campus becomes more lush. And if we have to provide evaluation for the economic, rather for the nature resources that we have on campus, then definitely there are plus factors. I actually had a paper presented and published in the Macau Ritchie Institute Journal, Christian Universities, their role in combating ecological disaster, the growth of poverty, and the crises in healthcare, which also shows how important it is to take initiative from where we are. And just a quick one, since Stefan asked me to say something about some of my symposium takeaways.
Sorry.
There, as a social psychologist, I do see the application of the symbolic interactionism theory, where we view the society as composed of symbols that people use to establish meaning. In the opening, Stefan did mention about looking out there, like the socio-cultural, political, environmental, and many other societal and global experiences, and see how that makes sense to the individual presenters and groups of presenters following the TAT approach, the thematic apperception test. And the way we interpret is very much influenced by our own subjective experience of a sacred dimension. And I'm glad to hear about the tree of values and the tree of virtues because those reflect the deepest values and meanings by which people live. And also, especially for Filipinos, we do embrace the idea of an ultimate reality and that there should be an inner path enabling a person to discover the essence of one's being. So given that particular attaching of meaning, one can go into that radiates into the way we think in terms of cognition, what we have feelings or passion for or towards, which is the affect, and the ways of doing and acting, or the behavior itself. And this is where the balance is needed because sometimes there is lack of congruence between what we think, how we feel, and how we act. So even there, whatever models of new economics we arrive at, it shouldn't just be at the level of thinking, but it should also evoke some passion because by having that passion, the chains of heart, that will definitely influence the way we behave. And once there is that harmony in our own thinking process, in our affect and the behavior, then that in a way collectively define our expressions and relationships with our own self, whether we are an authentic self, an integrated self, and how our own self deals with others, and that can be the family, the community, the political institutions, the global institutions, and the like, and ultimately the way we relate to our supreme being, or what we Christians call God. And having a continuing reflection that also feeds into our own concept of or assigning meaning to what we observe out there in the real world. Because again, as mentioned, balance is not static. The search for equilibrium or homeostasis is always in flux because the society around us is also changing. And that would be true to a number of economic forces that have been identified. I'm presenter number 25. So in a way, I feel so overwhelmed by a lot of those ideas given, but it's my way of making sense of what were presented in the past 2 days. And again, I thank the organizers for this opportunity to interact with each one of you. So thank you, Jenny.